BFTB, best fight the best. Listen, y'all. Listen carefully. Keith Thurman has no fans. He has no fans. Just want to make that very clear. He has no fans. None. Let me break this down. Let me go backwards now. Let me break it down why he has no fans. Keith Thurman has been out of boxing for damn near 2.5, 3 years. Some shit like that. Right? In that time, the only time that you hear anybody saying anything about Keith Thurman is when Keith Thurman pops his head up and says something, and people are like, oh, but when are you going to fight Errol Spence? Then all of a sudden you hear people saying, oh well, you know, he's still, it's one time, baby. Oh, he's still the best in the division. Look at his resume. Errol Spence hasn't done anything. Sean Porter, he beat Sean Porter. He beat Danny Garcia. Terrence Crawford, you know, he hasn't done anything. He hasn't done nothing. But every other day, you know, damn near 3 years. So you're looking at what? Over almost 1,000 days. Something like that. In that neighborhood of 1,000 days. Out of that 1,000 days, probably like 4 or 5 days out of that 1,000 days, you have his supposed fans showing up to say something and represent him and support him. 4 or 5 days out of that supposed 1,000, around that 1,000. What kind of fan is that? What kind of fan base is that? What kind? What kind of fan base? You got fighters that haven't fought, like Tyson Fury, who hasn't fought in and I don't know how long, who you have people coming out the woodwork talking about, still and constantly talking about. They've been talking about Tyson Fury since his hiatus. But they've been talking about it. Whether positive or negative, they've still been talking about it. Why? Because he's got fans. That's why. That's why. I mean, just look around boxing. Look around boxing. The only reason why Keith Thurman Runtime has people that support him in any way whatsoever is so they can hate on someone else. That's it. Just look and look at that, maybe that 4 or 5 times, and now being one of those 4 or 5 that people are talking about Keith Thurman. Look at what they're saying. Look at what they're saying. They're not saying, oh, listen, man, I think Keith Thurman is phenomenal. He's gonna do really good. Glad to have him back. He's gonna do phenomenal. And then leave it at that. No, that's not what they're saying. The people that are supposed Runtime fans, what they're saying is, oh well, I'm not sold on Errol Spence. He's all hype. He's just all hype. I'm not sold. I think Keith Thurman will destroy him. Or Keith Thurman destroys Terrence Crawford. He destroys Terrence Crawford. Keith Thurman already has Sean Porter and Danny Garcia on his resume. Those are the type of things that these supposed Keith Thurman fans are saying. Those type of things. They're not saying stuff specifically about Keith Thurman. You know, not disregarding everybody else. Why? Because kings don't chase peasants. So, you know, they're not talking about Keith Thurman as the king and just the king and leaving it at that. No. Their whole thing is to discredit and to shit on the other kings in the division. Now, did Keith Thurman beat Danny Garcia and Sean Porter? Yes, he did. Yeah, he did. So, boxing is a what have you done for me lately sport. It always has been. And it always will be. It's what have you done for me lately? And Keith Thurman has done nothing. If you want to talk about, oh, well, his resume is so good, his resume is so that. Well, Adrian Broner's resume is good. Adrian Broner fought a lot of fighters. Danny Garcia's resume is really good. He fought a lot of fighters. Now, those fighters might not have beat everybody that they fought, but they still fought a lot of fighters. And as a matter of fact, those guys actually fought better competition than all those guys. All of them. They fought better competition than all of them. However, Keith Thurman happened to win his and they lost theirs. Is Keith Thurman a good fighter? Yes, he is. Yes, he is. Keith Thurman is a good-ass fighter, man. He's a good-ass fighter. But the problem with Keith Thurman is Keith Thurman turned businessman. Keith Thurman is a businessman. And he's not a fighter. He is a businessman that happens to box. He is not a fighter that's trying to do good business. There is a difference. There's a difference. If you are a fighter that's trying to do good business, then you are a fighter first. Do you understand? You are a fighter first. You just happen to be trying to do good business. You are a fighter first. If you are a businessman that happens to fight, then you are a businessman first. So you will take into account the business first. And if the business makes sense, then you will fight. Well, boxing is a gladiatorial sport. Boxing fans are in it for the gladiator of the sport. The gladiator is a fighter. Boxing fans are not in it to watch a fighter do good business. Watching a fighter do good business is an excuse to avoid fighting. Watching a fighter do good business is an excuse to avoid fighting. It's the reason why Anthony Joshua is a fucking coward. Because he's doing good business. He is trying to wait out and age out Deontay Wilder. He is trying to put a bunch of miles on Deontay Wilder's legs. A bunch of miles. He's trying to remove a lot of steam from Deontay Wilder's punch. That's why he's a fucking coward. He is a businessman first. He's a businessman who just happens to fight. Fighting just happens to be Anthony Joshua's business. Keith Thurman is a businessman who just happens to fight. He used to be a fighter that just happened to do business. You know, I ain't afraid to let it go. Those are words of a fighter who just happens to have fighting as his business. But those are the words of a fighter. And if boxing wasn't his business, he'd still be a fighter. But because boxing is his business, you know what I'm saying? Those are the things that he has to do when it comes to boxing. You know, he has to fight whoever is willing to fight him. And that's what Keith Thurman was doing for a while. That's when he was, when I come at you, you better not duck me. That was Keith Thurman, the fighter, who just happened to be, Keith Thurman, the fighter, who just happened to have fighting as his business. That was that Keith Thurman. This Keith Thurman now is a tamed, caged lion. He is a tamed, caged lion. That's what Keith Thurman is right now. He's tamed. Tamed. It's not the same Keith Thurman. They're two different people. They're two different people. Now, I think Errol Spence, just based on how Keith Thurman talked when it came to Errol Spence and Errol Spence only, you know what I'm saying? I think he was always hesitant of Errol Spence. Always. You don't tell Floyd Mayweather, you know what I'm saying, if Floyd Mayweather says, you beat Errol Spence and I'll fight you. And then you say, oh, well, you give me $10 million and I'll fight Errol Spence. Give me $10 million and I'll fight Errol Spence. Those are not words from a guy who thinks he can beat a prospect. Those are not the words of a guy who thinks he can beat a prospect. Those are the words of a guy who's hesitant of that prospect. Those are the words of a guy who is afraid to let his O go. That's what those are the words of. He's afraid to let his O go to a prospect. So he's not going to fight that prospect. Or he's going to make it difficult for the people that want that prospect to fight him. Those are not the words of a guy who's confident that they will beat a prospect. Those just aren't. So I will say again, Keith Thurman has no fans. Keith Thurman has Errol Spence and Terrence Crawford haters. You don't tell Danny Garcia, I will welcome you to the welterweight division after him only fighting Guerrero, a guy that you guys called a bum that Floyd Mayweather fought. Y'all called him a bum, and Floyd cherry picked, but yet Danny Garcia fights him, and then Keith Thurman is willing to welcome Danny Garcia to the welterweight division. But you were trying to fight Manny Pacquiao, Keith Thurman. You were trying to fight him. If you could have fought him, you would have postponed your quote-unquote surgery for your injury. You were trying to fight Manny Pacquiao. But Jeff Horn fights Manny Pacquiao and beats Manny Pacquiao. And then Terrence Crawford comes back and destroys Jeff Horn. But yet you are not impressed enough to welcome Terrence Crawford to the welterweight division by him destroying an undefeated fighter who beat Manny Pacquiao. That didn't impress you enough. But you were impressed enough by Danny Garcia going the distance with Robert the Ghost Guerrero, a guy who was considered a bum and shouldn't have been in the ring with Floyd Mayweather. Hypocrisy at its finest. You want no work with Terrence Crawford. None. And you have no fans. You have Terrence Crawford and Errol Spence haters. That's all you have. You don't have no fans. You don't. Because if you did have fans, your fans would, every time we're calling this dude runtime, lunchtime, ponytail, greasy-haired fag, all this other stupid shit that we be calling this fucking coward. Every time we were saying that, you guys will be coming out the woodwork to go against that. But you don't. You don't. You sit back and laugh. You clown right along with. Until one of these 4 or 5 times in the last 2 to 3 years that Keith Thurman comes out and speaks, and then all of a sudden, you have a voice of opposition. All of a sudden, you're tough now. All of a sudden, you're coming back out like, oh, well, he's got the best resume. Keith Thurman Errol Spence hasn't really done anything. He hasn't really fought nobody. He hasn't beat nobody. Who's got a better resume than one time, baby? I am baffled at your lack of support if you are a quote unquote fan. You are not. You are not a fan. I will always, forever and always, support Deontay Wilder. Unless he does some fuckery. Other than that, I will forever and always support him. Period. Whether he's fighting or not. He could have a fight in a year or he could be off for 2 years and I will still support him. Because he has shown that he is worth my support. I will support Lomachenko. No matter what he's doing. Why? Because he has shown that he is worth my support. I will support the Charlos. Because they have shown they are worth my support. Period. And it will continue until they show that they are not worth my support. And then I won't. Keith Thurman has no fans. And the only reason why I want to see Keith Thurman versus Errol Spence is because I consider Keith Thurman one of the best. And I want the best to fight the best at all costs. Period. BFTB, and I'm out.